what this shows is that you can do multimodal inputs. And that is actually something that's quite interesting. I have no idea how to use this productively. Right now, this is purely present at hand. The best I can come up with is bland blog headers. So for me, the word of the year is by Kate Crawford, hallucitation. And so those of you who have had the unfortunate displeasure of grading this year have encountered these absolutely correctly formatted citations that don't actually reflect a real work. The reason these exist is it is very good at a low perplexity pattern of what a citation should look like, because there are a lot of citations in its training documents. It has no reference to a thing called a fact, though, so it will make up a likely author, usually white male, and a likely title, and a likely journal that looks like a citation that would be appropriate to whatever it's citing. This should be cause grounds for failure, not because of the use of AI, but because it is a critical failure of judgment. And the dog ate my homework is about at that level. Because if the student didn't care enough to double check their facts, then we don't care enough to give them a good grade. Word of the year, hallucitation. Oh, this is a fun one. Terms of Service 14 March, it has updated, but you own the consequences. So when you use these services, you agree to this Terms of Service. Not that anyone reads them besides me. You are responsible for content, including that it ensures does not violate any applicable law or these terms. Defamation, it's on you. But what if you disagree? Well, don't worry. You can pay damages to yourself. You will defend, indemnify, and hold harmless us, our affiliates, and our personnel from any and all claims, losses, and expenses, including attorney's fees, arising from or relating to your use of services, including your content. Which means that if you sue them and win, you pay your own damages, or you get into an endlessly recursive lawsuit loop around this Terms of Service. They just got a $10 billion investment from Microsoft. You own the consequences. Treating this like a search engine is extra wrong. So, question. How will they change my life? First off, expect a whole lot of scams, right? This is a floor wax and dessert topping. All of the crypto bros are pivoting to AI. You will note that they're using the term AI. This means nothing. Expect scams. Expect a shift in power. The way I get my dean's attention these days is I say, this represents a fundamental crisis for the university, because the mechanism for assessment no longer can reliably reflect our students' knowledge. If we plan for quizzes, if we plan for reading summaries, we cannot certify that the output of these tools is by the student absent large language model. And then they look really sad, briefly. Then I say, but it represents a triumph for the humanities, because it is the skills that we in the humanities teach, critical thought, evaluation of evidence, that will, how you say something, that will govern this new technological reality. This is a shift in power. This is a change in power dynamics, and it makes those in power, us as academics, grading people, quite uncomfortable. because changes in power have always made those who have it uncomfortable. There's this idea of the button, again, from Ethan Mollick's One Useful Thing, where previously time-expensive actions, recommendation letters, things that were demonstrations of burning human time were valuable. Now, we can get an AI to write those things, which means that previous costly signals no longer can be evaluated in the same way. So, some grant pro formas, the national impact statement, right? Recommendation letters, generic actions that were important not because of the output, but because of the cost of producing that output, are no longer as important. And when I see that our proposed guidelines have certain groups carving out exceptions for their special, and therefore you're not allowed to use AI, that is an example of this shift in signals. You will note that phone trees will be more helpful and less accurate. Again, crisis for the university, because our previous mechanisms for seeing if students have paid attention are no longer there. Now, the most common response when I give this talk to small groups of academics is, "I told you so." This is not news. This is me shouting, "The emperor has no clothes," because all of our previous cheating crises, all of the previous things were there before this. This just makes it impossible to ignore. Fast thinking, the thinking when we're not paying attention, we're just reading something, it's fine, sure, whatever, is a lot more risky because the tone of the thing has little relationship to the accuracy of a thing. A lot of good enough text. We are much more at risk of a failure of discernment. That if we as graders don't pay enough attention to our students' work, we will let their confabulations through. So we've covered how do you limit the scope of an AI's source. Yeah. that gets quite expensive because you have to do your own training. This is a fun one. How to make assessments that show high AI. The reason why I kept this in here, it's a trap, is statistical prediction of AI generation is hilariously wrong. In the 2 tests that I've done on 400 assessments from 2022 and 2023, we have a false positive rate of at least 15% in 2022. And with the second model, we have a false negative rate of at least 15%, because there was one modeler predict 25% AI generated this year. The other one predicted 3%. It's a trap. Statistical models of AI detection don't work. We don't have time to play with code interpreter, so we'll do that after. Basically, how do you get it to program for you? There are mechanisms. Here's a fun one. Faculty of Arts needs a policy. So I have a proposed policy blurb that I have been shopping around, where I say we cannot prove that students used or don't use this thing, therefore we have to adapt our assessments, but we make sure that we say students are responsible for whatever they put their name to. And we have to change our standards, because elegant, clean text is our baseline. If you don't care enough to edit your document, I don't care enough to grade you. It takes 30 seconds now. And any mistake that is characteristic of a failure of discernment must be more heavily penalized, because it no longer reflects knowledge. And so someone at break came up to me and said, generalization question. Are they still here? I asked them. Okay. The metaphor here is that of a sea urchin. Consider that when I am talking to you, right, I am standing in front of you, I'm speaking in an authoritative tone, I'm wearing a suit jacket. When I say something to you, you go, oh, how does this relate to my present knowledge? Hopefully there's some connections here and there, and that these connections agree, and you go, oh, this random schmuck must know what he's talking about. I will believe the stuff that I don't have evidence for, right? You presume my knowledge based on how I've connected to you and how it connects to your knowledge. You presume my knowledge based on my body language, my tone, my voice, my register. Large language models simulate many of these things in text, but they are not a smooth surface. You cannot rely on extrapolation from something where you've identified correctness to outside of that. Instead, they're a sea urchin, where if you find one thing that's correct, this tells you nothing about the surrounding landscape of knowledge, because there's no knowledge there. There may be points of correctness, you might get lucky, but there's not a surface of knowledge. It can be uneven confabulations. And therefore, confabulations point to not paying attention, much like turning in an empty assignment. Not turning in a good assignment. Because here, previously, if students made a mistake, we'd look at it and we're like, well, that's wrong, but I see where you're going, right? We could model the student's knowledge, and we could say, okay, you missed that bit, but you got it mostly right, and you're on the right track, and clearly you're paying some attention. You were drunk. It was a Tuesday. Now, that failure of attention is, well, they put it in the AI and they didn't care enough to check. And so that's why I made this policy recommendation. Can they help me in any reasonable way to write my PhD thesis? Policy time. So, I have been working on a university policy that will be going up to Academic Senate in a few weeks, depending on how far we get through editing. The easy way to think about this is, with the advice and consent of your supervisor, yes, you can use it. So if your supervisor is in the loop and has given consent in writing, the writing part's important because it will cover your ass later, you can use it for your PhD, for editing, for finding places where you didn't explain something correctly or effectively. Also keep a log, because I'm pushing us to use nature's rules, where if you're using one of these tools right now, it needs to go into the supplementary material, the chat logs, so that people can, if they want to, read over it and see if the large language model introduced confabulations or if they're your own error.
If they suspect that you have been using that without their approval, how?
By asking the student directly. Honestly, at that point, that relationship is a lot worse. We have no mechanism for policing the use of large language model. We have no evidence, right? If it's my word against yours, all I have is a statistical supposition of use. Unless the student has made confabulations or factual errors. At which point, bad egg, goodbye, academic integrity. But this is because we can have evidence in written material of confabulation. If you think a student has used it, either A, it is so obvious because one section of text is really polished and the rest isn't. Like, we're all academics, we know how to spot this shit. It's not new. None of this is new. The emperor has no clothes. This is the same as contract cheating. But you are allowed to use it with the advice and consent of your supervisor. I've already had to have some chats with research integrity over accusations of improper use, and it was a bunch of drama.
But in this one, there is no agreement.
Correct. It is much more tempting. It is a crisis for the university and an opportunity for the humanities. The idea that patients sometimes make statements that are false or engage in behaviors that reflect false memories or beliefs, and that they do this with no deliberate intention to deceive. So it is the stringing together of factual statements that have no relationship to the real, that are false, without the intention to deceive. Because these tools have no intention. They cannot have intention. And so therefore, these are false statements of fact produced by the AI, by the generative AI, in an authoritative tone. This is a long presentation. And so, genuinely speaking, I think that this is a lot more effective at the analysis stage with GitHub Copilot. I think that this is a real opportunity for students to go beyond Excel. Genuinely. That this is for writing code, making graphs, doing a good, better analysis in the same amount of time that struggling with Excel would have taken, including the humanities. There are some experiments like PaperQA, a Python library about asking documents questions that are interesting experiments. I emphasize experiments. But there are opportunities now for this to help in thesis creation with the advice and consent of the supervisor.
Touch upon that question. I've got it in my mind that if you're uploading novel, confidential stuff, have it run its
Yes.
information over. Or is that available for others?
Read the terms of service. If you pay for ChatGPT 4 from OpenAI, the terms of service says that they have no ability to access it, and you can turn off logging and you'll be fine. I have slight reason to believe them. Like, I will believe them until proven otherwise.
You would put up
For OpenAI ChatGPT 4 for text. Because the thing is, these things don't train on our inputs as part of a... It's not like there's a human there going, ooh, that's a great idea, I'll note that down, right? It just is added to, if there is any training, it's added to the giant pile of words. But if you use Bing Chat, the Bing conversational experience, you grant Microsoft a perpetual irrevocable right to use and display any of your input. Yeah, no. Don't use Bing for this. Read the terms of service, because the terms of service and the modality of how you use that service matters. So there is a maximally privacy protecting way of using OpenAI through its API, but that requires mastery of the command line. Spooky. Using the chat version, you can opt out and turn it off if you pay attention. And in Microsoft, you should have no expectation of privacy whatsoever. It's Microsoft. They are not paying me. So specifically, Bing Chat Enterprise, note that it's the same acronym, is privacy preserving. Give us money. So there are ways of encouraging your team to appropriate use. But if you forbid it, they'll just use it on their personal accounts. So this is why a conversation is important about what it's appropriate for, how to think about it, and how to appropriately use it, rather than just having the Defense Department going on their phones. Ugh. God, that's a terrifying statement. So yes, this is why this is an intentional conversation that cannot be flatly forbidden, because you have no statistical evidence for it. Instead, if you want to use it, here are the ways that are privacy and IP preserving. Can we discourage its use? Stay, King Canute is remembered primarily for the fable about the king and the sea. This asserts that King Canute sat on the seashore and tried to command the tide not to touch his feet, yet the sea ignored him. We cannot effectively forbid its use because we cannot detect its use. Cool. So remember these things. You own the consequences. There is no mind behind the mirror, and they do not operate on facts, but on statistical patterns. AI means nothing because it could be machine learning, large language model, a bunch of if statements in a trench coat, expert systems, whatever. Thank you for your time.